Chapter 481. Too popular. The moment that Alora was gone off with Jeff, more of the debutantes and the suitors chasing them came to pay their respects to the host. Dominic was not an easy man to corner. He tended to escape from the manor entirely before anyone knew that he was awake. This was their chance to make a good impression. Your Grace, wonderful event planning, and I must say that this manor is a true marvel. Was it always like this? Or was it expanded when you returned to take it over? One of the men, a slender fellow with thick glasses that were clearly magical goggles for some sort of precision work, asked. It was upgraded. The original manor house remains, but we added all the villas with their courtyards, renovated the garden, and added an additional wing onto the main house. Plus the fortifications, as the original design was an open manor with a reinforced lower wall for security. Yes, I had noticed that on the way in. A masterpiece of historical architecture. I don't suppose that it would be possible to get a tour of the house at some point? The gentleman of the sheriff's office placed me in this most wonderful apartment with a few other gents, but they're not at all interested in the study of historical buildings. Behind him, a man a few years older, with a remarkably similar face sighed. Their father had sent both of them to look for wives, but if he couldn't keep his brother from ogling the architecture, he was going to catch hell when they got home. Does your family work in architecture? One of the ladies asked politely, clearly not interested in their resident nerd, but not wanting to ruin the Duke's impression of her. His recommendation would go a long way toward impressing a suitor. Unfortunately, no. Father is a colonel in the army, and my uncle is Count Herthamia. The man said it as if such things were not worth pursuing. At least not when there were historical buildings around. But the ladies did take note. His entire family was fabulously wealthy, thanks to the county's income from the city of Herthamia. While he was a younger son of a side branch, he might have a good job thanks to his family's holdings. Certainly not a total loss if he could be trained. But not on the first-tier list of available options. Not for the noble ladies who were at the garden party, anyhow. But what they didn't know was that he was not any more interested in them than they were in him. He had seen an elf girl earlier, dancing in the garden. If he could find her again, he might be able to find out if she was also here for the event, or if she was a resident of the manor. Elf ears were an absolutely essential requirement for his future wife. If she didn't have them, he would happily pay for a magical alteration to gain them. I will see to it that you get a chance to tour the house before the event is over. We are far too busy for tours today, but there will be some events inside as the evening progresses. Dominic announced. Oh, one of the girls asked, gracefully sliding through the crowd to reach his side. Yes, I am told that some of the guests have been moving at a confident pace, so starting this evening we will host a more intimate seated meeting for those with potential partners. Overseen by the manor staff and resident royals, to prevent scandal, of course. Dominic explained. That was wonderful news. A full formal dinner would be difficult for the manor. It was more practical to hold dinner outside. But it got loud with so many people gathered, and a quiet room to sit and talk would be a welcome change. The crowd constantly shifted until Dominic found himself standing next to Amy, who was in a simple red and black gown, looking very much like she was planning to hurt someone. What's this? My apprentice is making her debut without asking me for a dress? I could have ordered something suitably elegant if you had asked. I'm not a debutante. The sect elders informed me that sect robes are not appropriate attire for the event, and they made me change before I came to represent the Duskblade sect as part of your security detail. Dominic smirked at her. Did you tell them that security normally wears weapons and armor, not party dresses? I did. They didn't budge, so here I am. They also didn't think that Dave was suitable to be a bodyguard in the crowd. Something about a risk of unrelated casualties. So, they're all on the wall for the day, now that you're back in the house. Dominic nodded. I see that the royal guard is shadowing the princess as well. They do get their armor, though. Amy glared at him. You're enjoying this too much. Do you know how long it's been since someone made me wear a party dress? Didn't you used to do honey trap missions? That's different. That's battle attire. This is just uncomfortably breezy for no good reason. I can deal with the discomfort if there is at least a purpose to it. Dominic smiled, and one of the nearby men chuckled at her complaints. Just by her tone alone, It was clear that they were good friends. But Dominic had called her his apprentice, and she addressed him without his title. So, most assumed that she was a sorcerer of some sort, and just didn't show any non-human traits. Mostly, she was just irreverent, and routinely disregarded any form of titles. But they might not be wrong about her being a sorcerer. Dominic was certain that she was not entirely human. But even in a simple dress, she looked like she belonged here. All he had to do was convince her to smile, so that she didn't scare off the people who were coming to talk to him. Chapter 482. Not his date. Dominic had miscalculated one small factor in Amy's plight. While she was standing next to him as a guard, many of the guests, both debutantes and suitors, were drinking fairly heavily. The fact that she was clearly a bodyguard was escaping them, and within the hour, Dominic could already hear the rumors that she was some minor noble's daughter angling to become the Duke's mistress. They were even joking about how long she would live after Alexis caught her. It was not improving her mood. Fortunately, the fact that Dominic was mostly ignoring her presence unless she was relevant to a conversation was keeping the rumors that they were together at bay, and Alexis did eventually make her way to his side. "Enjoying your outing?" Dominic joked, seeing the slightly frazzled state of her hair that said she'd spent a lot of time in the sun, and the hair products could not keep up. "Absolutely stunning, darling," she replied in a sweet tone that had many of the debutantes sighing. It was the fantasy life. A princess, married to a wealthy duke who not only pampered her and clearly cared for her, but didn't take a mistress and didn't press her into household duties. Oh, how wrong they were. He definitely pressed her into far more household duties than he took care of himself, just not the cooking and cleaning that the wife of a common man would do. He also made her deal with the royals while he hid and worked. That had to count for something. "I am going to step inside and oversee the dating conversations. Are you fine here in the sun?" Alexis whispered after a few more guests had made their greetings. "I am. Go ahead, and I will stay out here where they can see me. It keeps them in line. But if you see Prince Fahad, send him out here so I know that he's still alive." Alexis laughed as she walked away. Poppy had been hanging off her brother for half the morning, until Prince Fahad had kindly reminded her that this was a dating event, and if she was to have any hope of finding a husband, she had to stop making all the eligible men think that she was involved with the Crown Prince of Axbridge. Nobody else present was willing to try to compare to that. But most of them also didn't know that Poppy was the Crown Prince's sister, only that she was a princess of somewhere. It was only after he forced her to socialize with others that they realized what the situation was. However, her mission was clear. Her marriage was second to finding another good wife for her brother. Someone that she liked, and who wouldn't try to keep her away from him. "Well, Your Grace, how is your first major social event? You've thrown yourself into the deep end on this one, but it seems to have worked out marvelously so far." Fahad laughed as he finally reached the spot where Dominic had been cornered by the crowd. "It's just getting started. We don't even have the majority of the bachelors here yet, since everyone only splurged on the mages to send their daughters here." Dominic replied. The prince smiled. "Of course. It's far more important that she finds the right husband than that their sons get married right this instant. But you should have a load of soldiers arriving soon, will you not? Word travels fast. I was speaking with Alora earlier. That girl is an odd one. Even for a techno-witch. Could it be that his version of what was normal was just becoming progressively more warped the longer that he lived in Westover? He had thought she was relatively normal, though high energy. The mood of the visitors changed when Prince Fahad was present, Dominic noticed. The majority of the ladies didn't view him as a potential target, and those who did were quickly reminded that his wife could and would kill them for trying. But the prince was next in line to the throne, and even the slimmest chance that he might take a fancy to one of the debutantes was enough to have them on perfect behavior, highlighting every bit of manners that their governess had taught them. It was actually rather annoying. "We should do a masquerade ball for the final day of the event. Give everyone who hasn't partnered up a chance to meet without that immediate judgment and first impressions," Dominic suggested. "Oh, that's not a bad idea. Most of the debutantes should have at least 1 or 2 masks with them, as masquerades are so popular. But if the men don't, we can arrange them quickly enough." Fahad agreed. With transmutation magic, they could turn out 100 new masks for the men in a few hours one morning. That wasn't a big deal. It was the fancy masks that the ladies preferred which had to be made in advance. But having the men faceless only solved half the problem. The ladies would still likely recognize them all from previous days. Hopefully that would be enough for them to at least reconsider some of their choices. They were not destined to have time to dwell on that, though. A large portal opened at the gates of the manor, and bugles sounded, heralding the arrival of someone important. Or multiple someones, as Dominic quickly learned. A royal herald stepped through, and paused while the crowd rushed out of the garden to see what all the commotion was about. Presenting the heroes of the Natural Sons Regiment. By decree of the king, 40 new barons have been named, and 300 titled knights have been elevated. The herald proclaimed, then stepped aside to let the regiment enter the manor. Of the 1,000 men that Dominic remembered, the 340 who had received titles appeared to be the entirety of what remained of the regiment. Every man showed signs of hard battle, the slightly haunted eyes that no amount of hair product or fancy clothing could hide. But they walked with pride, and they began to smile as they realized Dominic had come to greet them in person. Now, the real party cold start. Chapter 483, Regiment in Westover. Gentlemen, welcome to Westover. They told me you were coming, so I prepared a little something for you. Dominic joked as he reached the front ranks of the regiment. General Merlot stepped forward from the lines and shook Dominic's hand. I believe that we are still missing 2 members of the regiment. He noted. Princess Alexis is inside, supervising a dating event for prospective matches, and Billy Bob is... there he is. Baron Willie and Robert, come welcome your brothers home. Dominic called. The Baron had been called away from the regiment early because he had lost all his brothers and had inherited a title. But he was still an eligible young nobleman of sorts. Dominic honestly couldn't remember his marital status, but he didn't recall the Baron arriving with a full family the way that Baron Keith had. If his memory was right, Billy Bob had just brought some staff and commoners he had hired. General, you look like you've been through it. It's good to see you again. Billy Bob greeted the older man. Oh, we did. That monster invasion was no joke, even with the mortars. But that's a topic for another night. Congratulations on making Baron. Same to you. The general laughed. It seems everyone forgets that I was not a young man anymore. Look at me now, a Baron, off to build an estate when I should be retiring. Dominic patted the old general on the shoulder. Fear not. We have barony manors completely intact and complete with furniture. All you need to do is clean them and a bit of repair work. Plus, we've got all sorts of new arrivals looking for work, so you don't need to go far to get staff. Who knows, you might even manage to borrow one of these untitled couples to help you out. The way things are going, I suspect that some of them aren't going to want to leave. Not with 40 new barons who all arrived alone and all those knights. The title of knight was convenient, as their children would have status for an extra generation. But more important to most lower nobles was the stipend that came with it. Life on the farm was hard, but when the king sent you money every year, it was a little easier. Plus, a knight had the rights to a double plot under a baron. That wasn't something that was strictly enforced in Westover, where land was still plentiful and steam tractor could help with the work. But none of the new arrivals knew that. No need to stand on ceremony. I've seen the lot of you covered in mud and shaking off mortar blasts. Come, socialize, meet this year's finest batch of debutantes, and then we will talk in the morning. Dominic explained. The Adventurers Guild has prepared a dorm for you all, so that you can room together until you have time to look for private accommodations. Alexis added. You say that as if it's a foregone conclusion that we're staying. General Merlot joked. I know you're not going anywhere. Besides, you were awarded a barony. And where else would it be? All the empty baronies that had been vacated after traitor barons were purged had already been reassigned as war honors, so the Duchy of Westover, or the wild lands along the border really were the only options. With everything that had happened, the wild lands were basically untenable. There were too many monsters, bandits, and other threats lurking about to be refurbishing a barony manor in the middle of nowhere. And that's assuming that there was one to renovate. Much of the region had never been populated. With Dominic's tacit approval and the princess stepping aside, a horde of well-wishers descended upon the new barons of the Natural Sons Regiment. It no longer mattered that they did inherit anything. It didn't matter if their mother was a mistress and not a wife. They had made their own names, gained their own titles, and now that they were back from the war, they could start to rebuild their lives. They had been given regimental dress uniforms for the ceremony in the capital, and there were few debutantes who could resist a man in uniform. At least, that was the consensus among the other noblemen who had been briefly forgotten in the rush to meet the new arrivals who had caused such a stir today. Alora and her friends were telling everyone that they met about the honors about to be heaped upon the regiment, and sharing all the rumors about the great deeds that they had managed. At first, it had seemed innocent enough, but after seeing how everyone was reacting to them, he was beginning to suspect that they had been sent by the royal family for just this reason. It might have been the youngest princess who contacted them, but it was unlikely to have been entirely her idea, unless the instructions were added later, when she asked permission to send them out of the academy. General Merlot remained at Dominic's side as the arrival turned into an impromptu party in the front drive instead of the garden. He wasn't looking for a wife. He had already been there, done that, left flowers at her grave. But he was not about to miss his beloved regiment's first chance to get their hands on a woman in the better part of 3 months. That was the sort of entertainment that you couldn't pay to see. There was a time when I thought the nobles were actually as uptight as all the rules say that they're supposed to be. Dominic noted in an idle tone as the party began to spread through the entire manor compound, with a few budding couples sneaking off to the trees behind the hay field like nobody noticed. That's a horrible thing to believe. It'll ruin your entire outlook on the nobility when you find out the reality. Just wait until they realize Dave can smell arousal, and that the trolls have been ordered not to let them go all the way. Dominic joked. See, that is pure evil. Leaving a gentleman with unfulfilled needs. But still funny. Putting heavy plate on mountain trolls has to be one of the best ideas I've had since I got here. Chapter 484. Why so close? After a few minutes of socializing, getting some of the hormonal need to chat with the women out of their systems, the barons began to make their way back over to Dominic. He was the one who would be assigning them territories, and most of them weren't sure how well he remembered them, or what for. When they had left the capital, they were still wet behind the ears noble recruits, none of them with any combat experience, and though they had trained hard, Dominic had seen them at their newest. Certainly not at their best. Dax, the son of Marquis Burton and loyal brother of the Natural Sons Regiment, came over with a smile on his face, which now looked far more haggard and gaunt than it had the last time that Dominic saw him. Baron Dax, good to see you again, and congratulations on your promotion. Dominic greeted him. Thank you, Duke Dominic. Now that's a strange thing to say, though I'm lucky in a way. If they had decided to recognize your royal lineage and bring you into the family as a prince, I would have to call you your highness, and I'm not sure that I can do that with a straight face after I've seen you hurl mortars at Dago's soldiers like a goblin throwing rocks. Dominic laughed. I've thrown them at goblins as well. I highly recommend it. A bit of a waste of munitions if you ask me, but if you throw enough of them, your casualty rates drop significantly. All that it took was a few thousand mortar rounds, and most of a goblin invasion force was gone. Dax laughed. How did you get them to charge you? We launched mortars into their ranks outside the city for weeks without stop, and still didn't manage to get rid of them. I charged them, and the mages that were controlling them. All it takes is a bit of pressure, and they have no problem getting back into mortar range. Or into punching range, if you don't throw them fast enough. I will keep that in mind. Are we still expecting to get more monsters in the area? Naturally. They live in the wild areas, and there are more than enough of them around that we will never truly get rid of them. But then we're not completely done with that Dago's prince yet, are we? I fully expect that he's going to do something stupid and aggressive soon, since his last plan didn't work out for him. The soldier sighed, then shrugged. Well, if it brings it all to a nice, tidy conclusion, I'm all for it. But I wanted to ask you a bit about the barony manors. Are they really in inhabitable condition? Most of them, yeah. There are many further out that have taken heavy damage and decay losses. But the ones closest to the main town were under a curse, and nothing came in to mess with them. No monsters, no looters, nothing. They might have taken some damage or gotten unwanted visitors in the past few months, but even then, most of them should only need cleaning and basic repairs to move in, and they'll still have the majority of their basic goods. They weren't invaded by looters, but hostile mages and summon monsters. Do they never remove things like furniture and kitchenware? Dax shrugged. You've got a point there. Even if they ripped out the walls to burn for heat, they're not going to take the stove with them. So, it's mostly a matter of finding the right spots. The boys all have big plans for the next few years before that tax exemption ends, so you should likely be prepared for a bit of chaos. Oh, there's no need to worry about that. We've got mountain trolls as manor guards, royal guards patrolling with the princess. We brought back the Veiled Maids program, and we've got magic-using militia with Magitech rifles. So, in short, you've built a city that is an absolute nightmare for anyone else? That does sound fun to live in. What sort of rifles have you given the locals? A simplified version of the ones that I made for the regiment. It took a bit of work, but I got the design to work much more smoothly, with just a bit more magic. I gave them the option for mana bullets, instead of just solid shot made with a spell. But that's because most of the militia are magic users already. Minor sorcerers, mixed blood sorts, failed mage academy applicants. Pretty near every commoner in town can use at least slightly more magic than usual. It's enough that we didn't even have to go out of our way to recruit shift workers for a factory making Magitech stove inserts. That's our major export right now, by the way. Well, now I feel much better about spending the evening looking for a wife. Who knows, if I find one and hit it off, we can go house hunting together. Literally. Well, that's one way to help a lady feel at home. If she gets to pick the house and the territory that goes with it, there is no room for complaints, either. I will warn you, though. The baronies here were quite small when they were originally founded, so if the king awarded you a larger portion of land as a barony, not every house will be eligible for renovation. The two that are already here are only a few square kilometers each, and that is already enough that they almost overlap some of the other houses. Dominic added. It's good land, so I can see how that would make sense for wavemates. They had a lot more nobles and fewer commoners. Enough that it blurred the distinction between what should be a knight and what was a barony. A side effect of being a bit too free with the titles, I suppose. My father had some opinions on the matter, but I've learned not to trust speculation. The theory did sound plausible, though. If the baronies should have been knights living under the earldom, then it made sense that they were so close together. Then, when they were promoted to baron, their lands were simply smaller than their title would normally warrant. Chapter 485. House Sizes. So, what you're saying is that most of the former barony houses would actually be suitable for knights. And then the actual barons would just have authority over the knights living closest to them, while we're all under your command as duke. I think that can work with what we were told about the number of old houses, which have been left in the area. The Crown Prince described the situation as it was when he left, so we do have a decent idea of how things work here. Dax informed Dominic, as more of the natural sons came over to say hello. The Crown Prince should have a pretty solid grasp on the situation. The houses were built to the size of the family living in them, not their status, so I think that the most appropriate way would be to just let all the barons pick with respect to the amount of land that they would normally have, and then the knights can fill in the other houses. There are too many knights, though. There aren't 300 barony houses in the region. So, we might need to draw a map before everyone gets to choose, so that we don't end up with a real mess. We've got all the skilled trades here to build family compounds for all the knights, which would be more appropriate than some of the barony houses, which were just a large stone house on a hill. If they're not in great shape, or they were always small, they can just be left as historical memorials, or assigned to someone who is willing to put in the work to expand them. The soldiers shrugged. I don't see the problem with that. You did joke about letting us find a wife during the parties and then brining her, and that would work out rather well. Not as some sort of test of wifely virtue, but simply on a practical level. They'll be there as long as we are, and I am 100% certain that they would rather be included in the decision than simply informed of where they were going to be living after marriage. Not many people get that option. You move into whatever property the family you married owns. But this time, we have the unique chance to not only pick our homes but our neighbors. One of the men offered. Dax raised his glass in a toast to the man's brilliance. Why didn't I think of that? Most of these young ladies also know each other, as much as we do. And while we're all brothers in arms, they have their politics and cliques to consider. It might be best not to force ladies who don't get along to live next to each other. But that also assumes that we do manage to find one. There are sure to be more men coming, and while there are more ladies in total, these are the finest of the batch. The competition will be fierce. Not so fierce. One of the men in the crowd laughed, and Dominic saw that he had a blushing lady tucked under his arm. "You've found just the lady for you?" Dominic asked.
"Aye.
She's one of Princess Poppy's friends from Axbridge. We've met a few times in the past, when the princess came to visit the palace. My father is a royal guard for the king, you see. But her parents didn't approve of her marrying a guard's fifth son with nary a title to their family name. However, things changed a bit when they had some family troubles, and now she assures me that they will have no objection to me courting this lovely lady." Dominic didn't pry into the situation. If they were still allowed to send their daughter with the princess to the debutante events, then it was more likely a financial ruin issue, or a fall from grace in political circles than something extreme or criminal. In that case, you have my blessings, and we will arrange the formalities after the event, when you are both absolutely certain that this is your choice. I'm not sure if Princess Alexis explained earlier, but I won't be presiding any weddings during the Dune Ball. Only when the event is over will we begin the ceremony, so there will be no trickery leading to a same-night forced wedding. There might be need to backdate a few applications to save dignity, but I do hope that most of you can be more subtle than the ones who are currently at the base of the manor wall, getting to know each other. Noted. The guards can see into the trees from above, and the spot is taken. That might not have been the right lesson to gather from his speech, but it would do well enough. Dominic just hoped nobody got injured trying to sneak off into the hay loft while the Blink cat was sleeping. The creature might be adorable, but it was a powerful magical creature in its own right, and its claws could be deadly. Now, let's all move the party back to the garden, instead of standing on the roadway. Back in the garden, the congratulations were flowing as quickly as the rum, and everyone was getting increasingly inebriated, to the point that not all the swaying was in time with the music. A good sign, Dominic assumed, as Castellan Julio looked at least 10% less stressed out than usual. "Any issues?" he asked, walking up to the Castellan. "Nothing major. We've got a long line for the private meetings, and most of the tables in the gardens are full as well. It's a good problem to have. It means that our young nobles are getting along well with the debutantes. But it is also a rough situation for the nobles that will be arriving later, as this day is going so well that I suspect many of the debutantes will be effectively off the market by the time that the last of the suitors arrive." Dominic sighed. "We probably messed things up that way. But there isn't much to be done about it now, and the guests of honor are all here. They can only blame themselves for missing the first nights. But if there are so many fine options, I suspect that the first day or two will only shorten the list for the two groups. Should we have them make a list tomorrow of the ones they would like a second meeting with, outside of a formal event? If both sides list each other, it would make things easier, and we could arrange the meetings all day tomorrow before the after-dinner dance. I believe that Princess Alexis is already on it. Her Highness Poppy dragged the Duchess away some time ago to plan more events." Chapter 486, Capital Chaperone. If the two princesses were working together, they would definitely get something arranged that was much more grand than anything that Dominic could have come up with. So, he focused on the practical matters of the duchy with the natural sons, who he quickly learned all intended to move here. None of them had much of anything to return to at home, and they didn't want to take over the mismanaged territories of a traitor baron if there were even any left. Most of them had been taken by branches of the original family anyhow. It might have been the strangest debutante event in Signia history, with so many noblemen up for grabs and women from so many locations, all gathered in a city that wasn't the capital. But more than that, there was also fresh land up for consideration. If they could impress the Duke, they could move directly into a new manor house on newly acquired territory, which wouldn't cause any grief with the extended family and wouldn't displace any of their other siblings from an inheritance. There wasn't anything better to ask for, not from either side of the arrangement. Dominic sipped at a drink as he watched the debutantes work their magic on the returning soldiers of the Natural Sons Regiment, and wondered if he should remind the men that they had to do a bit of the thinking with their larger head. The little one would only lead them into trouble. Dave gave him regular updates, both about the people he had caught sneaking off together and the distinct lack of other threats to be found around the manor. The adventurers had gone out during the day to make sure that the farms and other areas around the city were clear of monsters and other threats, so there wasn't much to see except more locals. Those weren't a threat, even if they were sometimes interesting characters. The only truly interesting update that Dominic got all evening was that Baron Billy Bob was hand-feeding chocolate to one of the maids who had come with the debutantes. Possibly a bit of a questionable call now that he was a titled baron, but given his nature, it was hardly surprising that he had gone for some mild-mannered maid instead of an ambitious, noble woman. The man's entire plan for the future involved watching children and his barony grow. A wife with business ambitions would just make more work for him. Logically, that would make him a lousy choice for baron, and possibly for husband, as he had little ambition to do more than was necessary to get the barony growing. However, Dominic suspected that it wouldn't matter. He was close enough to the city that he was going to end up with extra residents and money flowing into his coffers as Westover expanded. Dominic retired to his room late in the evening, once he was certain that everyone had been settled back to their designated locations, and there were no more surprise visitors on their way. His quiet night was doomed to end far too early, and there was simply no way around it. Not long after dawn, the first of the day's airships arrived. They were carrying more suitors for the ladies, these ones from the capital. Lord Dominic, a pleasure to meet you. A heavy-set man in a plain steel mask greeted him as the airship landed. Likewise, mister? Baron Fall, of the capital region. I believe that you've met my son. Dominic frowned as he tried to remember. Oh, right, the colonel. Is he doing well? It has been some time since I saw him last. Still on duty in Dagos, unfortunately, but in good health and spirits. I heard that you were holding a proper shindig here and thought that I would come chaperone for the boys of the capital. We got a full camp set up if you can just point the way. Dominic nodded. There are some rooms left, but it will do them good to rough it for a few days. You can set up in the open field nearest the manor. There are other camps set there already, so just pick a clear spot and talk to the gate guards about firewood. We've got plenty cut, or we have Magitech fireplaces for sale. They've been a fairly popular option for making a cooking pit. The Baron chuckled. I will let them know that it's an option, if they want to shell out the money. They're not likely to be needing to renovate a house, unlike many of the young men who are planning to move here to Westover with their wives. So, a Magitech fireplace would only be useful to them in the long term if they didn't have one in their family home. More noble ladies for the capital. I can see how the locals would be a bit miffed that their sons almost missed out on the dating event of the year. We've got quite a few eligible young ladies here. Enough that they're sharing rooms, and we've had to move all the servants to the old barracks building, as the ladies are sleeping in the staff quarters of the manor. Baron Fall patted Dominic on the shoulder. You went all out to make sure that the two groups are separated, didn't you? Good work, Your Grace. Most nobles just assign them rooms by rank, and then you end up with a dozen rumors and scandals a day about who is sneaking out of whose room in the morning. Dominic rolled his eyes. If we hadn't managed to work a method to get all the ladies crammed into the manor compound, we would have had to put them into the city, in apartment blocks. We have even worked on a protocol to keep unwanted visitors from sneaking into their rooms. The Baron laughed. Well, you've gone and jinxed it now. Guaranteed there will be more debutantes coming within the day. Chapter 487, Jinxed. Dominic knew that he should have never mentioned the fact that they had managed to get the ladies into the manor grounds. No sooner had the words come out of his mouth than word came in from the airships on station that there were incoming vessels, and the very first of them to land had an entire group of debutantes from the capital. Not just a few of them either. 100 young women from decent families were all packed into the airship with their belongings in storage items. That alone was enough to give Sheriff Nate a headache, but the pure number of them was far more than the manor could hold at this point, which meant that they were going to have to start putting them into the new housing blocks, which meant starting the guard patrols and bringing out the trolls to keep the creepers out of the ladies' dorms. Lord Dominic, we need your assistance. There is an, incident? We need you at the residences. A city guard whispered as he struggled to catch his breath after running halfway across town. All right, I will join you. Are they giving you trouble about the crowded rooms? Dominic asked. No, not exactly. You will understand once we get there. That wasn't encouraging. Dominic jogged toward the new developments and tried to decipher what the sound he was hearing was. At first, he thought it was a secondary party, which seemed like a perfectly normal sort of thing to do at an event like this, when the manor was packed. The whole city was in dating mode right now, so there couldn't possibly be only one party going on. But what he found was far from what he had expected. The development that the airship of ladies had been sent to was one closer to town, as the men had been housed starting at the edge of town. But they were already drinking, and this batch of ladies from the capital were of the wealthy, but nearly common sort. The families where they hadn't had a titled noble in the family for 2 generations, and were looking at losing their noble status when even 1 or 2 more senior family members passed. So, they were all determined to meet wealthy and titled gentlemen, and they were not happy that they had been put anywhere but right next to the manor. However, the rooms next to the manor were taken by the men of the senior noble families, who weren't even home to hear the ladies demanding that they move to give them priority. The city guards were getting no respect, as they were all commoners. But the moment that Dominic showed up with a pair of mountain trolls, the whole attitude of the crowd changed. Your Grace, please help. We've been relegated to some development on the edge of town, and the city guards are not letting us move. There isn't anyone in these houses. We've knocked and knocked, but nobody answers at any of them. Please make them see sense. We simply can't afford to be relegated to the sidelines of the debutante event. Dominic raised his hands to get the crowd's attention. Ladies, you misunderstand. These are not empty dorms. They were reserved for the noble sons of the higher-ranked families. The reason that nobody is answering is because they're all at the garden party. If you would like to put your belongings into one of the assigned rooms and get prepared for an event, you can come join the garden party with all the other debutantes. But first, you need to pick a room and get settled in so that you have somewhere to sleep tonight. Dominic insisted. That got through to some of them, but others were working on a much higher level of entitlement. Your Grace, couldn't you speak with them? One of the girls asked hopefully. You are looking for husbands, correct? And with this setup, you get to walk right past the residence of the most eligible men in town, correct? So, what is the problem with walking a few more meters to get to the party? Dominic countered. They hadn't thought of it that way. They just wanted the best rooms for their debut, and they hadn't considered the practical matters. Now that he had pointed it out, Dominic could see their minds working, scheming on how to use this to their advantage, and he began to realize that it might be the noblemen who needed protection, not the debutantes. At least the noblemen would have something to lose if they misbehaved in the way that everyone was concerned that they would. The ladies would only stand to gain exactly what they wanted if they could sneak their way into someone's bed and cause a scandal. Neither family would want it to get any further than it already had, so the marriage would be essentially guaranteed, and there would be no convincing argument against it when you'd already taken the bride to your bed. Going by the smile on Dave's face, this was likely the way that it usually happened, despite all the protocols designed to ensure that it was not the outcome. For all of their failings, they were remarkably astute when it came to matters of relationship advice. Blunt and crudely spoken, but quite accurate. His presence calmed the immediate objections, but the complaints that he had initially expected began the moment that the ladies recalled that they would be sharing houses with each other. They hadn't brought maids, servants, or anything else, due to the space constraints and cost. But only about half of them had any sort of domestic skills. There are restaurants in town, including a large market area. If you cannot cook, you can eat there or do all your eating during the events. Dominic joked. The ladies looked horrified at the thought. They usually ate as little as possible during events, both to prevent bloating in extremely tight-fitting dresses and because they didn't want the others to think that they were starved at home or simply gluttonous. Chapter 488. Double Jinxed. While that group was getting settled in, word came from the northern patrols that there was a group coming from their side of the city. That was unusual, as there were no cities in that direction, but they might have come from the east or west, and had simply missed the location at first. Clearly, they hadn't been following the river, so it might be somewhere in northeastern Signia. However, when Dominic went out to meet them, what he found was not a bunch of lost noblemen, but a group of young noble ladies who knew full well that they were somewhere that they should not be. given that they were young ladies of Dagos. If the trucks weren't enough of a hint on their own, the royal insignia on the side would have told anyone who cared to look that they had originated from within the Dagos borders. They traveled with only 2 battered guards and 1 driver, while older women drove all but the first truck. Halt where you are. All travel from Dagos is subject to inspection, Dominic announced. Might you be the Duke of Westover? Or are you one of the guests? The middle-aged woman driving the first truck yelled back out the window. I am Duke Dominic of Westover. In that case, we would request asylum within your walls. The woman replied formally. Where did you come from, and what are you fleeing? There was a short pause, and Dominic heard the truck being shifted into its parked setting. We left from Staptontave, fleeing the war and the famine. Originally, we had an escort of guards, but we were attacked by wild monsters on the way, she explained. And just how many guards did you bring before the attack? The woman nodded and stepped down from the truck. All I ask is that you grant the ladies asylum, she began. We left Staptontave with a force of 3,000, headed directly here to Westover. Things went wrong right away, as the mages were suddenly called away, and then there were attacks by wild monsters nearly every night, and sometimes during the day. We were even attacked by a horde of trolls a day ago, and barely survived with our lives. We've fewer than half of the young ladies that left Staptontave remaining, and 3 of 3,000 soldiers. These few trucks are all that remains of an armored regiment, and the ladies are in desperate need of safety. Dominic frowned. You do understand what the penalty is for bringing Dagos soldiers to Westover, right? Forget the fact that this is Signia, and bringing soldiers is a violation of the ceasefire. This is Westover. The woman nodded. And I will pay the penalty on behalf of the ladies. They didn't have any choice in the plan, and they can't go back. Every family that they come from is thrown in with Prince Kaizan, and the rebellion is all but lost. Things are so bad that they sent their daughters here and took their sons to war. Even the children, boys not yet 10 years old, are going to the final battle. Now, will you take in the refugees? Dominic sighed. Are you and the other older women soldiers or servants? The woman gave a hearty laugh. Oh, neither of those things, Your Grace. We were all camp girls. When things got proper bad during the battle with the trolls, we took up the order to flee with the non-combatants. We managed to save most of the camp supplies. But none of the men left the battlefield, and the 3 we've got with us were already at the trucks, crippled and waiting out the battle as reserves. Dominic looked at the trucks, and the woman paled. Do you really hate the people of Dagos that much? The soldiers, yes. Every bit of what you're thinking and more. Ever since I was a small child. And you have no idea how painful it is to even consider letting the people of Dagos walk free and breathing into the city after what was done to it with their support. He agreed. The woman reached into her pocket and lit a cigarette. War is a nasty business. I know that the soldiers like to say that war is hell, but we both know that isn't true. War is war, and hell is hell. But of the two, war is much worse. Because there are no innocent bystanders in hell. Dominic agreed, then continued. Did you know what was going on here when you left? Or did you leave only expecting that the ladies would be enough to get your soldiers close to town, so they could launch the attack? The woman blew smoke at the sky as she reminisced about the past. The idea was that they would come here, take the city, move in, and claim those ladies as their wives. Now, that's not quite how things worked out for them, but we've brought the ladies here alive and well, so I'm asking you for mercy. Dominic nodded. And I'm considering it. I probably shouldn't be. I could take the whole convoy as war prisoners and sell them to my men under a debt contract, stripped of their noble standing. But we both know how that ends for a noble lady. You know, I might actually be getting soft now that I'm a married man. It's a bit disgusting, really. Dave, what do you think? The troll rubbed his nose as he pondered the situation. He had followed the basics well enough, and he even understood the part where the trollish village on that side of town had been the ones who had killed off the last of the soldiers for them. He would make sure that Dominic sent them presents for that. But he was downwind of the ladies, and they smelled like soap and fear. Long-term fear, like they had been terrified for weeks, not days. So, Dave's estimation was that they weren't part of any invasion force. At least, not a useful part of it. I think we should bring them out and make sure they're not hiding weapons and nasty stuff. Then they can join them other girls. At least the young ones don't smell like they've been with the soldiers. This one needs an extra bath. The driver looked a bit offended, then her face went pale as she realized that the troll could actually tell that she had been with a few of the soldiers before the battle. That sort of information was supposed to be an unspoken fact of life for camp followers, not public knowledge. Chapter 489. Without Witnesses. Dominic called the patrolman over and whispered to the hunter. Send word to the Merchants Guild. I want 20 goats sent to the trollish village as soon as possible. It's a reward for services rendered. Take the rest of the patrol with you, as I will be searching the caravan, and that part doesn't need spectators. The hunter nodded. If Dominic found something, it was better if nobody saw him kill an entire caravan full of teen girls. If he didn't find anything, it was better for their dignity if nobody saw the debutantes being searched. Either way, he wasn't lying about that part not needing spectators. Dominic hadn't realized that everyone assumed he would actually kill the entire convoy if things went badly. They were not soldiers, he only had a small, moderate grudge against them. But he wouldn't kill them. At worst, he would just follow through on his threat to put them under a debt contract as criminals for assisting the Dago's army in an invasion that violated the peace treaty. They would probably never be able to afford to buy their way out of it, but it would still be better than starving in Dagos, or being left in a ditch on the edge of Westover. Once the patrol was well out of range, Dominic motioned for everyone to exit the trucks. Form a single line. Dave will be searching you for contraband, while I inspect the vehicles for weapons, bombs, or other potentially hazardous cargo. I wouldn't put it past Dagos to send us toxic gas or a fatal virus. He insisted. The girls looked terrified, and even more terrified when they realized that Dave was a mountain troll. Right, their soldier retinue had been finished off by the trollish village. Dominic began to inspect the vehicles with one of the trolls assisting, while another searched the ladies with surprising gentleness. It reminded him that they were no more than pawns in someone else's game, and that the game had been all but lost before they had even made it to Westover. But that didn't change his search. There were camp supplies, food, chests of clothing, and a few hidden valuables. But nothing outstanding. No signs of rotting meat that might be used to poison wells, or any sort of sealed containers that could be hiding toxic gas. As neither Dominic nor Dave could smell anything out of the ordinary, other than the festering wounds of the few remaining soldiers. Those weren't bad, and they would heal up quickly enough once the Larry troll from the healing hut came to see them, according to Dave. How many more trucks were lost along the way from Staptentave? Dominic asked the soldiers once he had cleared the trucks. 28 trucks were lost, all cargo transports for the infantry, and each pulling an artillery cannon. We lost most of the cannons when we were attacked by roaming ogres, and the last few, as well as most of the trucks, when we were attacked a little over a day ago by trolls. That was a big win for the trollish village. They needed some trucks that they could hire the carriage makers to convert into tractors for them. But these ones were likely coal-powered, so they would need extra conversion, as the trolls objected to the smell of burning coal for heat. All right. I would offer to go bury the bodies, but they will be taken care of. Now, the question is what we are going to do with you. Unlike the ladies, you are Dagos soldiers. You crossed the border with weapons in battalion strength, and you brought artillery. Any of those should see you executed as war criminals, given that Dagos is officially no longer at war with Signia. However, I might be able to overlook the situation, given your dire condition on arrival. The problem is that I really don't want to. The soldiers nodded grimly. Perhaps we can offer another solution? The soldier paused, and Dominic waited patiently as he tried to find the right phrasing. If we were deserters who stole a convoy of military equipment from Dagos, not to invade, but to sell to the Duke of Westover on arrival, would we not be considered foreign fugitives instead? As I recall, that's not a death penalty insignia. Dave smiled. He's a thinking one, he is. Dominic hummed as he considered the proposal. Either way, he was going to obtain their vehicles and military equipment. But he could accept their status as deserters, given what would happen to their reputations once it was made public. You understand what will happen to your families back in Dagos once you are known to have defected to Signia, do you not? The soldiers laughed. Families? We're from common stock, taken by the recruiters, and in all likelihood, our families starved to death years ago. We didn't even keep our family names once we were at the training camp, so I am not certain that the army would even know who to go after. The driver, who Dominic noticed was missing a leg, just shrugged. The village that I grew up in doesn't even exist anymore. We passed by it during the war, and it's nothing but desert sands and a dried-up well. The man had a point. Most of Easter Dagos was abandoned at this point, as the decade of drought had put an end to all sorts of farming, and even most of the rivers had stopped flowing. Parts of it hadn't had a drop of rain in years. All right, there's a formal procedure for declaring a deserter a defector, but we can skip that. Strip to your skivvies, and I will find you different clothes. You can't step into town dressed as Dagos soldiers. You wouldn't survive the day, even if you swore to the gods that you had defected. There is that much resentment. One of the men asked, both from the Signia migrants and the lifelong Stantia province residents. Yes. You might have had it rough when the drought hit, but the commoners in the provinces had the drought plus extra taxes to repay the war effort that was still being used to suppress them. I will see to it that the ladies are treated properly. All you need to do is keep your past to yourselves and find a quiet spot to move into. I hope that you know how to farm. Chapter 490. Brought them to the house. Dominic turned away from the men and the trucks to find the line of women blushing and giggling to each other as Dave waited patiently for him to finish. All good. No storage items, no bad stuff, no bombs. All girls. Only one pregnant. Dave confirmed. Perfect. One of the camp followers raised her hand.
No, wait.
You're not skipping over that part. Which one is the pregnant one? If it's one of the girls, their parents will kill us if they find out. Dave gave her a look as if the woman was a bit dim. Only girls get pregnant. Boys can't do it, no matter how hard they try. The shock of the statement caused the woman to pause for a few long seconds before she began to laugh. I meant that if it's the young ones, there will be trouble. If it's one of us, it's not so much of a problem. She explained.
Oh.
No, it's not one of the nanny-aged girls. It's a younger one and probably a Knoll. It might be a monster-blooded human as the father, but I think pure Knoll. Dave stated confidently. The women all looked horrified and began making protective gestures, but Dominic noticed that one of them was a bit more insistent about her denials than the others. Not his problem, but he could help her out a little. If there is a chance that it's you, just to talk to Larry, the healer on the outskirts of town. His wife is a midwife, and he has the most medical magic of anyone in town. They will be able to get you all sorted out, no matter what the situation is. Anything from a sprained ankle to unfortunate encounters with monsters during your travels. The ladies nodded. That was valuable information to have, even if they weren't in trouble right now. As you're all free of anything that Dave thinks might be contraband, I will escort you into town. I see that you have camping equipment, and normally, that would be the best option with the town so crowded. However, given your lack of guardians and your origins, I will bring you directly to the manor and have you set up with a tent within the walls. The women looked confused. If they were a threat, wouldn't it be smarter to keep them as far as humanly possible from the manor and the higher-ranked nobles who would be staying there? There was something wrong with Dominic's logic, but they couldn't understand what he was trying to do. Dave, on the other hand, had a perfect idea of where they could stay. A large tent set up next to the servants' rooms in the barracks would give them access to showers, proper facilities, and it would put them right next to the trolls' lodging. Between the servants the other nobles had brought and the trolls, there was unlikely to be any trouble out of these ladies during their stay. They certainly didn't seem like they were going to cause trouble as the caravan approached town, or when Dave led the few men off to the healers to have their injuries treated, so they could start to get their life back on track. With them gone from the caravan before it came into town, the only ones in sight would be the ladies, and few would object to having a few more noble debutantes coming to the party. Leading the convoy through town got a few intrigued glances, but mostly, everyone was either too busy preparing for the evening's events or already at the manor to socialize. They were headed that way, which meant to the locals that they were nobles and not part of their dating pool, so they simply weren't interested. What use was it to ponder which nobleman would end up marrying which debutante from some wealthy family when they had work to do and the lovely ladies of the local farms to match with their sons. That was much more important. The real issues started when they arrived in the manor, and the ladies of the other nations realized that there was a whole group of young women from Dago's here to compete for the best nobleman. If anything, the Dago's girls should have had the decency to show up on the very last day of the event and fought over the scraps. The guys that none of the ladies gathered here wanted to be with. There were more women than men all over the continent, and the same was true here, at least among the nobles. But that sort of imbalance was not the sort of thing that led to goodwill and cooperation. Not when the noble titles were still passed down exclusively through sons. As long as that was true, it was imperative that they find the very best of the best for marriage, as it was the only hope for their children to have a solid inheritance of their own. For the ladies here, who were the younger daughters and even younger daughters of branch families, it was even more critical to them that they marry well because they didn't have anything waiting for them at home but the life of a spinster or a servant to the main family. The glares that they gave the ladies as they were led to the tent that the Daves who were off duty were currently erecting felt like they were burning through the back of Dominic's head. Putting them all the way out here, past the servants' quarters, but within range of being instantly protected by the trolls, was probably the best decision that Dominic had made that day. The only way that it could have gone worse for him was if he brought the soldiers. However, the real chaos would get started once the ladies were changed and joined the party. They might be unwanted rivals, but they were still noble ladies of marriageable age.